Good evening. Very poor imitation, probably, of Alfred Hitchcock, who I have heard when Elizabeth II gave him a knighthood, supposedly responded, "It's about time." I don't do an English accent well. In order to do it, I have to thrust my lower jaw forward. I could go into why, but let's not and say I didn't. Let's go ahead and pour some whiskey. I love having this platform here. I started using it so you could see the whiskey while I talk, but it makes it even easier for me to judge how much I'm pouring. Since I watch the screen, thanks to my setup being thoroughly amateur, I can't really judge how much I'm pouring watching the glass. This, and you've seen it before if you've been watching my videos, is a Kelly Liquor store pick of Knob Creek. It is, let's see, I'm trying to read small print here. Distilled 1/8/2014, selected date 2/10/2023, so it's 9 years old. 120 proof, which for those of y'all who think in the alcohol by volume terms, that's 60%. This and the 12 are in, excuse me, I love itches where I have trouble reaching. This and the 12-year are in competition for being the best Knob Creek I've ever tasted, and the Knob Creek 9 is mighty good bourbon. I don't know how I'd rate it on my Hicks scale, which goes from purr to mighty fine, but just off the cuff, that 9-year is not, it's very good at the very least. If I make sense, I apologize. Before I do anything else, I want to mention that just before I went on the air, before I come in here to record, yeah, I'm on the air like I'm the king of the universe. I saw that I now have 70 subscribers to this channel. And as I've said every time I've announced a milestone, except in my case they're more like inch stones. You know, oh, I've progressed another inch towards the far wall. But as I've said every time I've announced a new high, for anybody else, it's a small number. There are channels out there with millions of subscribers. Even whiskey channels frequently, consistently, routinely measure their subscribers in the hundreds, if not thousands. But for me, hitting 70 is hitting more than I've ever had. And I think it's fairly impressive considering that this channel is by design a niche channel. I am aiming at specifically at people who are new to whiskey, and as far as I know, there's not another channel out there doing that. And I'm trying to take everything I wanted to know when I was first starting out in 2021 and wanted to find in one place and couldn't find, I'm trying to supply that. Oh, that smells good. I remember the first time, it's been a couple of years now, the manager at the Kelly Liquor store in the Mountain Run Shopping Center let me have a sample of this, and it was fine. In one of them little sample cups, it was fine. And this is my 6th bottle of it now. This is number 35, next to last. And I don't remember doing number 34. Obviously I did. That's why I wrote the number down on my notes. And I have these notes because I'm forgetful Jones. I can come into the kitchen, open the cabinet, and think, what did I want? I'll put the bookmark in the book, lay it down, reach for my phone, pull up Wikipedia, and not remember in that short space of a time what I wanted to look up. And it's not age. For one thing, I'm only 65. That ain't old. And for another thing, I've been that way for 50 years. So it ain't age. But tonight, in this video, this installment of the Whisky Basics series, which if you've been watching along, you know that I'm rebuilding, I want to answer the question, what do I like about whiskey? It's a valid question. There are people out there who drink whiskey. Legally, technically, it is whiskey. They throw down the shots of Jim Beam White Label and Jack Daniel's Black Label, and they're drinking whiskey, but all they're doing really is using the whiskey as an alcohol delivery system, and at 80 proof, they got to drink a considerable amount to get the same dose that I'm getting in one glass of this 120 proof. This is 40 proof points higher than the two I named just a moment ago. But I'm not drinking to get drunk. I know I've said that in at least one previous video, and I think more than one. And I'll be honest, if all you want from alcohol is to get drunk, number one, you're doing things wrong to begin with. But number two, just buy a bottle of Everclear already. Get that almost 200 proof alcohol and do a couple of shots and you're blasted for the night. Don't waste your money. Don't waste good whiskey, or even mediocre whiskey, if all you're after is the effect. So why do I like whiskey? Well, I wrote down, once again, if all it took to be a doctor was bad handwriting, I'd have 22 MD degrees. Well, the first thing I like is the color of it. Now, you can't see it here. Let me turn it and see if there's any way. No, it's not going to show in this light. I will try, I'll probably put a picture of this stuff on as the cover for this video. That's what I normally do. And if I can remember to pick this specific one, I'll find a picture where the light is shining through this and throwing red on the top of the car, which is where I take most of my pictures. I don't know how I got in the habit, but I did, and I can think of worse habits to be in. But I like the color. This is a nice, let me get it up in the light against, I don't really have a good place to look at it. The best way is to have light behind with a white surface on the other side, and I just don't have that in this setup. But it's a really nice gold, well, not gold, but dark copper color. And I'm getting ahead of myself with what I'm doing, because the next one I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I can't see on the screen, although I can in the glass. You might see the legs. And I don't have a video specifically about that, so for all y'all who are newbies to whiskey, when you swirl it around, that serves several purposes, one of which is to give you a rough idea of the viscosity of it. I like to tell people, you're cruel, mean, and viscous. doing a pun with vicious and viscous. Viscosity is the thickness of a thing. If you know anything about motor oil, you know that 40 weight is more viscous, it's thicker than 30 weight. And 10W40, depending on conditions, will either have a lower viscosity or a higher or something in between. How they do that beats the flying flip out of me. I am not a chemist of any sort. But when you swirl it, you can watch the legs, and they can give you at least a rough idea of how viscous the whiskey is. And that can give you some idea of what the mouthfeel is likely to be like. And as a general rule, it is definitely not ubiquitous. It has plenty of exceptions. But as a general rule, the more viscous a whiskey, the less it's been watered down, and therefore the more likely it is to have full and rich and dense flavors. Next, yes, I'm on the right track. Shocking. Next is the aroma, or the nose as we call it. On this, there's a smoky element. Definitely there's honey in there. I get cinnamon and brown sugar, and I don't often get brown sugar on the nose of a thing, which tells you something about how good this is. And although it's 120 proof, I'm not having any trouble putting my nose right into the glass. I do have to be careful of the right nostril. It is sensitive to alcohol and doesn't pick up anything else. So I'm using mostly my right nostril, as I always do. But I'm not getting that scorch as I sometimes get with lower proof stuff. Vanilla. A little bit of butterscotch and or caramel. I know there's butterscotch. There might be caramel in there. And I'm not telling you really anything that is not standard from a bourbon with me. But this is not identical to, say, Old Granddad 114, which I just finished a glass of a few minutes ago. Same distillery, same basic notes, but yet different. Bourbon does have, as some have pointed out, a kind of narrow range, but within that range, there is still plenty of variety. And this is an enjoyable nose. I like smelling on it just for the smell. And that is part of enjoying whiskey, not just evaluating it, not just judging it, but enjoying it. Now that sip was just for the mouthfeel. And it's a nice mouthfeel. It's somewhat thinner than it possibly could be at 120 proof, but it's certainly creamy and smooth, the mouthfeel is. And by the way, for those of you who are brand new, smooth, when you apply it to the taste, means nothing. Oh, that tastes smooth. Well, what do you mean? Well, then why didn't you say this and that and the other? Don't describe the taste of a whiskey as smooth. Don't say baking spices. Give us some specifics. I don't know what baking spices are. My mama didn't have a jar of baking spices. She had nutmeg and cinnamon and I don't know what all spices she had. And smooth is equally meaningless, except when you're talking about a texture, which is what the mouthfeel is. And this whiskey, it does have a smooth mouthfeel. And just to make sure I don't get lost, I'm going to scratch some things off there. It keeps you from seeing me for a little bit, but that is not necessarily a bad thing. So it's got a nice smooth mouthfeel, and I also got a lot of flavor. On a really good whiskey, even when I'm just looking for mouthfeel, I'm going to get flavor too, even though I'm not focused on it. And then I like the flavor too. Whew. Little bitty alcohol. Why am I doing that? I'm going to need it. The predominant notes on the palate there were honey, cinnamon, and brown sugar. And there were other things floating around in there also. In given time, I could pick them out and give them to you, but this isn't a review of this whiskey. I'm simply telling you and demonstrating for you what I like about whiskey. And the flavor is one of those things. I spent more time in introductory stuff than I had planned, so I'm further down the clock than I intended to be. But so I won't, after all. I had intended to tell you why the flavor is such an important part of why I like whiskey, because of how I got into whiskey. But I don't remember which ones. I think I might even have a video specifically on that. But you can look through the past videos in this playlist and various others. Don't ask me which ones. And I explain how I got into whiskey and how the flavor of it was the key. But I do like the flavor. Then there's the finish. So let me check the finish for you. Oak. Definite oak. More oak than I'm used to with this, but a palate can differ from night to night, or even through the day. There's oak, there's some red pepper. The oak is turning into chocolate now. Semi-sweet chocolate, almost unsweetened chocolate. And again, I could pick out other things, but this is not a review. But one of the things I like about whiskey is the finish. Now, we call it the finish, but the finish really is just the aftertaste. You know, you take a bite of a beef enchilada in red chili sauce, you chew it, you swallow it, you still have flavor in your mouth, the aftertaste. Well, that's the same way with whiskey. And we call that finish, and a good whiskey has a good finish. The only whiskey I've encountered so far where I could really wish the finish were better, but the nose, the mouthfeel, and the palate make up for it, is Arnroot Harbinger. It's a 115 proof bourbon from the Arnroot Republic Distillery in Denison, Texas. And that the finish needs serious help. It needs a southern climate. But the rest of that is so wonderfully good. And then the last thing, I'll just sip and swallow so I can show you what I'm talking about. I feel it going down. With this bourbon, you can legitimately call it a Kentucky hug, because this is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. But I just call it a hug, because bourbon can legally come from anywhere, in the United States. If you could somehow make a distillery work in Nome, Alaska, you could make bourbon whiskey way up there. If you can somehow make a bourbon distillery work in Key West, Florida, you can make bourbon there. Now, something like 90-95% of all the bourbon in the country still does come from Kentucky. But Tennessee whiskey, and I don't have a video on this either. If you think I'm wrong or you want to know why I say this, just ask in the comments, which I check about once a week because there's so few of them. But Tennessee whiskey is really a variety of bourbon, but obviously they're making it in Tennessee. There's bourbon from Texas. There's bourbon from, egad, I don't know where all. Sagamore Spirit is a distillery in Maryland. They just started making bourbon. The Hard Truth Distillery up in Nashville, Indiana, not Tennessee, Nashville, Indiana, they make bourbon, although their rye whiskey is so much better. But I like that hug. You can feel the heat going down. Now, you can also feel it if the whiskey goes down the wrong way. Boy, can you feel it. And it is thoroughly unpleasant. It is unpleasant when anything goes down the wrong way, but when alcohol does, ooh, man, you think your chest is going to burn out from the inside. So, what do I like about whiskey? Okay, I sped up enough that I'm only at 22 minutes and I'm not going to prolong it. What do I like about whiskey? All the things that I've named. And they all go together. It's not just separate things. But just like every part of this bottle or every part of this glass is necessary for the thing to be a bottle or to be a glass. So everything that I've mentioned goes together to form what I like about whiskey. And so, having come to the end of that, once I upload this, just one more video to make, and boy do I love the light at the end of the tunnel. It's now this big glowing opening and I can see the outside of it. Having come to that point, folks, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the new subscribers as well as those who've been here since the really thoroughly amateur days. And here's to y'all.